Oi, what do you think you're doing? Who do you think you are? Don't turn those things. Get back here.
So hello, and welcome back to Living the Life, the Ministry Years, part 1.10, but part B, because last time, if you remember, we were looking at Jesus' kind of arrival for the first time as we read about them in the Gospels. No, that's not true, is it? Luke 1 actually has Jesus visiting the temple when he's 12, but as an adult this is the first time we read about Jesus visiting the temple. So we've just got a few verses we're going to look at this time. So we're going to look at John 2, 18 to 22, which is the kind of consequences of Jesus' turning over the money tables, and that will run down to the end of chapter 2, but we're going to spill over into verse 1 of chapter 3 because it acts as a kind of a very interesting sort of transition verse. So we'll start as we always do with me reading the text, and then I'll kind of share my thoughts on what some of these things mean. So and because of this being the turning over of the money tables, the Jews questioned him. So now the Jews in this context are probably the temple guards, maybe with some higher up authority, but remember the temple guards are actually from the priestly caste. They're minor priests, but they are from there. And this isn't the same as the time when Jesus turns over the money tables at the end of his ministry. He's just a local hothead causing a bit of trouble. And actually the questions they ask him, you kind of reflect that, in that they kind of they are sort of the kind of the sensible police type questions of what on earth do you think you're playing at? Whereas of course at the end of Jesus' ministry, where he's got huge crowds that are hanging on every word, is very, very different, of course. So those Jews, they questioned him and said, what sign can you show us seeing as you're doing these things? So we were thinking last time of just how unpopular the temple markets were to become by the time that the temple is destroyed. But as far as we know, Jesus is perhaps the first person to really take things into his own hands in the turning over of the money tables. And we noticed last time how he kind of fulfills Psalm 69, I think it was, and Zechariah's prophecy. And probably that's been part of the kind of the dialogue. There's been throwing out of verses as Jesus does it, you know. And so they know there's a thing there, and it's kind of like, yeah, okay, we get it, you got some issues. So what authority have you got? What sign can you show us that you've got some reason to claim prophetic authority in this situation? So there's right at the beginning of this little passage, we see there's a challenge to the kind of prophetic authority. As we get towards the end, we're going to see that there is a wide-scale acceptance that there seems to be something of that to Jesus. Now, to put it into context, that doesn't have to be that he's a great big national prophet, but there's something of a prophetic authority that's a kind of question in these verses. So, and Jesus answered them and said, now, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'm going to raise it up. And actually there's an interesting shift which you get in the Greek which you don't see in English, because we have the word temple here, and we've had the word temple when Jesus turned over the money tables, but actually in the Greek the word has changed, and that's a really key thing to notice, because as we're going to see, you need it to kind of put the things together to work out the timings of this incident. So the word that 2 verses ago was John's Gospel has translated as temple, is the word iron. And iron, it kind of perhaps more, to get across the meaning better, we should perhaps translate it as the temple precinct. It's the wider temple area, and you find it used throughout the Gospels in that way constantly. We also find it in the rabbinic writings. They do a very similar thing. And there's a kind of consistency in the Greek word that is used to delineate particular areas of the temple. So the word that Jesus used here is much more the sanctuary word. The word there is naos, I think it is, isn't it? Yeah, I've got it here. Yeah, I've got it on my notes. Naos. It's and it's perhaps better understood as the sanctuary. So what I've done is, retrospectively, if you had the notes from last time, I've gone back and I'm now putting temple precinct. I'm going to translate temple precinct and temple, or sometimes sanctuary we'll put for the other word, because that's helpful. So Jesus says, destroy this sanctuary, and in 3 days I'm going to raise it up. And just let's finish the text, and I'll go back to it rather than comment as we go through. So the Jews said, for 46 years the temple has been built up, and you're going to raise it in 3 days? He, though, was speaking of the temple of his body. See, now while he was and after he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and then they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. And so there's a couple of things I want to draw out. I want to get a kind of slightly technical point. Before I do that, it's really useful to notice the way in which Jesus seems very, what's the right word? He quite deliberately expresses something of that hints at a death and resurrection experience. Now, Jesus may not fully understand what it is at this point, but it is there. And that's worth noting, because some kind of critics have come along and seen, if you like, Jesus' death and resurrection as a failure, something developed at the end of his ministry. If you encounter and talk with members of the Unification Church of the Moonies, as we refer to them, Reverend Moon teaches that that John the Baptist got it wrong, because he should have said much more explicitly and clearly Jesus is the Messiah, but because he only told a few people and didn't really do it properly, the plan will go south, and things don't work out the way they should. And so Jesus has his special meeting in the Mount of Transfiguration. He sees Moses and he sees Elisha, and they have to have a special meeting, and they work out what he should do. And then he goes on a secondary plan where he's going to die, and that requires then Reverend Sun Young Moon to come along and tell everybody what Jesus should have told them in the first place. See, and that's not the case, because here we very clearly see that right from the beginning Jesus understood something of his messiahship. And of course there's reasons for that. It's prophesied. It's the gospel according to Isaiah. We see the suffering servant, that there is a death and resurrection experience that is always wrapped up in the Old Testament prophecies about the suffering Messiah. And Jesus knows it, and it's there, but his disciples don't see it because they haven't really got their heads around it. That's understandable. They're still seeing the kind of kingly vision of the Messiah. And they don't expect this to happen at this stage, but they see it in retrospect and hindsight. But the thing I really wanted to focus on this time was there is a kind of a nice little thing, but you have to unpick it a bit. That kind of firmly links these experiences and what's going on with Jesus to a date in history. So this conversation is happening either on or very, very close, 1 day or so away, from April the 7th, 30 AD. And we can tell that because of this change of the word temple and this reference to 46 years. And if I kind of explain it, it's a little bit like this. Sometimes you can't see it easily in your English translations, and there is a slight fuzziness at the grammatic level. But the use of the word sanctuary does make it much more explicit. So I'll explain a little bit. It says the phrase about being built up for 46 years is in the aorist tense, which has we often say kind of rather simply it's got a continuous nature to it. So that would imply that the temple has the sanctuary has been built for the last 46 years. But that's not what's been built for the last 46 years, or 40, or however you want to count it in this way. What's been built for the last 40-something years is the outer precinct, the very word that Jesus doesn't use, or let's say the gospel writer doesn't use here, but was using just a couple of verses before. And I think that's quite deliberate, because he understands what's going on. And so I've translated it like this. It says, so the Jews said, for 46 years the temple has been built up. And that's kind of getting across the continuous nature, but that the aorist tense doesn't have to imply that there's a 46-year period when things are happening. It can, it's slightly odd, but it can imply there was a period 46 years ago which is now completed. And the reason why that's important is to try and fit the dates together. You see, what happened in around 20 BC, Herod had decided to kind of ingratiate himself. He was going to repair the temple. And so in 20-ish BC, late 20 BC, he starts to repair the temple. And according to Josephus, he takes roughly 18 months. He takes just over 18 months, I think. And then when he's finished that, that's now when he starts to build the outer area, the temple precincts. And so 46 years ago, the temple was complete. It was built up and it was finished. And at that point, they started building up the outer courtyard. So for 46 years, the temple has been built rather than built up, if you can see how it goes. And then they said, but you're saying you're going to raise it in 3 days. Now, a lot of English translations kind of focus on the building up bit, implying it's the outer area, because that kind of makes more sense in English in terms of the way we say things. Whereas it kind of seems a little bit clumsy to say it has been built for 46 years, but it has stood for the last 46 years. Is probably the impact. You say, well, why is that relevant to saying that to Jesus? Well, I think if you think about this when it happened, there's a lot of conversation. It's not just a single statement. It's kind of what on earth is going on, and it's kind of like the thing has been standing for 46 years. It's not likely to fall over tomorrow. So what are you talking about it being destroyed about? And not only that, but there has been an ongoing work. And look at the size we've got to now, and that's taken 46 years. You think you're going to achieve all of this in that period? I don't think so. But the nice thing is, if we take it that way, we are able to date this. In the past, you see, this passage has been taken to be that the 46 years relates to the courtyard and the temple. You see, rather than the division between the two. And if you include both together, then you can push this back to being 27 BC. AD. And so Jesus' ministry runs 27 to 30, whereas I take the view that it runs from 30 to 33, and so you understand the reasons why. But another thing that's just kind of worth kind of highlighting at this stage, of course, is of Jesus himself as a tekton, which we've translated as a carpenter mainly because Jesus said, "My yoke is easy," and people look back and said, "Oh, he must have been a carpenter then." Because he made yokes, you see. But a tekton technically is just an artisan in the building industry. We have it in the English word architect. Tekton, architecton, is a master craftsman. Paul actually says, I'm a master craftsman alongside Jesus, you see. And he's talking definitely about building at this point. So Jesus is a builder. And here in the context, it's kind of almost like they've taken him quite literally. So you're saying, right, if this fell down, destroyed this temple, you'd be here and you'd build it up in 3 days. I don't think so. It's part of the kind of conversation. But it's relatively good humoured. It may not be nice, but it's at least kind of measured in those sorts of ways. And so then, as we know how the story goes, they push Jesus outside of the temple. Just a final comment on this before we move on. The word Jesus uses for raise it up again, ironically, actually has the word for a market in it. So the Greek word, let me get the pronunciation right, agero, and the agora is a marketplace, and it's the kind of getting up that a market does early in the morning. You see, it actually normally means woke up. I woke them up. But it normally gets translated as raised up because it can be used metaphorically as well. But I think it's kind of nice and interesting that he uses a word there in the Greek that kind of gets the whole thing of we had a temple and we built a market around it. And what you're saying is you could raise a temple and you're going to raise a market around it as well. Now, I know that theologically that may kind of cause a few kind of confusions, but I just love the nuance of wordplay in these things. Anyway, I don't want to take too long with the things we're doing. So now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, so Jesus stays on, there's a kind of a whole holiday period. It starts with Passover, moves on to Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then we have the Feast of Weeks. And then you've eaten a chunk out, and you might as well hang on a few weeks until you get to Pentecost. So it's in this period, Jesus is still there in the days immediately around it. And it says, many people trusted his authority, seeing the signs he was doing. So they've asked him, what sign can you show us for doing these things? And now they've chucked him outside. Some people are seeing what he's doing. They're probably understanding these signs as acts and so on. Maybe there's the odd healing. We don't hear of any miracles, but maybe there are. But maybe some of it is just this kind of prophetic act of turning over the temple and speaking into them and speaking out and calling out some of those things about the time and so on. And so people are seeing what he's doing and they're accepting them, and they are saying, oh, I can see he's got something prophetic on him. But on his part, in response, this would seem like a great opportunity for Jesus to kind of gather up that momentum, but he doesn't. And so we read, but on his part, Jesus didn't entrust himself to them, which is just simply a way of saying that he's not meeting them in their agenda. He's doing things on his agenda, and he is allowing them to kind of say, oh, I think I trust this. There's something I want to take note of here. I can see the authority in him. But he's not kind of going, great, thanks for endorsing me, because actually that somehow would kind of tie him in. And he doesn't entrust them since he understood all people, and he didn't need human testimony, as he himself knew what was in man. So he understands himself, he understands what's in them. It's great that they're recognising it. It's a key important moment because it's going to build over the next few years, but he doesn't kind of give any commitment to those folks. And that really sets up the first verse of chapter 3, which now says, now there was a man of the Pharisees called Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. And John could not have chosen, well, Jesus couldn't have chosen, couldn't have found a better kind of second or advocate than the man Nicodemus. We're going to find out a bit more about who he was, but we know he's a ruler of the Jews. He's on the Sanhedrin. He's there, of course, when Jesus is tried, and he's always been someone who's been open to Jesus. And he's going to approach Jesus, and Jesus is going to, well, I'm not going to kind of get too far into next week. He's going to approach Jesus. He would have been absolutely the ideal person to have endorsed Jesus. But in this context, there's this challenge right at the beginning of this passage. What sign do you give? There are people who are seeing the things and recognizing it anyway. Jesus is not allowing that to start to influence and shape him and the agenda he brings to the situation. And in the context, we see there's a good reason for that, because a very key person who most people would have absolutely loved. We're going to see Nicodemus comes from a very senior Pharisaical family, and if he put his mark on Jesus, things might have been very different. But Jesus knows there are things to challenge within the Pharisee tradition, just as there are in the Sadducee tradition and in the Hellenistic tradition and to think of all the different other sects that there are. There are various things. He's going to do it his own way in his own time. And so we have that nice little kind of run-in and a transition to that point. So those are my thoughts today. Hopefully that's helped put these verses into context. Next time we'll be looking then very much at the character of Nicodemus and finding out a bit more about just what he represented. But until then, I'm going to say enjoy reading the Bible, meditating on it, getting to know the story of Jesus. But I'll say goodbye and see you next time.